You know that feeling when new Commander product comes out and you're incredibly excited to build a deck around something that you just bought, and then you also have the stunning realization that there aren't enough cards to build what you want specifically, and not you don't have enough cards. Like, the cards do not yet exist. Now, obviously, this is something that takes a lot of hindsight to figure out. You have to really know what you're going for and then realize that, oh, well, Wizards hasn't printed enough for me to build this, so I guess I'm just not going to care yet. Then you take the deck apart, and after you're done taking the deck apart, you realize shortly after, you know, I really wish that deck would have worked. And then, like, a year later, enough product comes out that the deck archetype that you specifically wanted to build in the colors that you wanted to build is now completely supported in the way that you wanted to build it. There's just one problem. You've already taken the deck apart. It's not in your possession anymore. And, if you wanted to get it now, you're gonna have to spend like $100 on the pre-con. Well, let's go ahead and solve that problem for ourselves right now. We are going to build a $15 version of Faldhorn with the upgrade section intact like normal so that you can see the direction this deck is going to end up going. That all said, let's get into the video. Faldhorn, the Dread Wolf Herald, is a 3-mana, 3/3 commander who's in Gruul colors. And she's got an amazing ability. She makes wolves whenever you cast things or drop things on the battlefield from Exile. Now, when I first started playing with this commander, she felt like budget Prosper. And if you've ever played Prosper, you know that any Prosper that is not OG Prosper is just far weaker Prosper. This identity crisis wasn't helped by the fact that Faldhorn was also in a Baldur's Gate bit of commander product, which was effectively a supplementary commander set to previously made Dungeons & Dragons commander product. Now, I was already not the biggest fan of Prosper. I'm not a huge fan of mass treasure token strategies as they are, and he's his own advantage engine as well. Honestly, he's a bit of a boring commander for me, so I thought originally that Faldhorn was going to be the answer to that problem. Allow me to play this kind of strategy without feeling like it was anywhere near as boring as it was feeling when I played Prosper. The problem is it wasn't. The stuff that was available when Faldhorn came out really didn't fit my playstyle, but then we got the new Exile set with its Discover mechanic, and then we got more stuff in Modern Horizons 3 to supplement the Cascade mechanic. Now we're starting to speak my language. Now we are starting to get into the my deck plays itself and I don't even know what's coming up off of it type of strategy that I absolutely adore. I love it when I play Pantlaza. I love it when I play Nira. I like a commander who feels like I'm gambling, and if I get a high roll on the gamble, then everybody deals with a powerful board, and if it gets wiped out, so be it. But if I end up rolling low on the gamble, well, I get absolutely nothing. That kind of variance feels really nice to me. If I win off the high roll, it's great. If I lose off the high roll, that's also great. It shows that everybody else at the table had a deck that was powerful enough to deal with the random high rolls of the deck. So that said, we are going to be playing Faldhorn, Dread Wolf Herald, trying to lean as far into the Cascade mechanic as we can. Now, for those who don't know, the Cascade mechanic says that whenever a card is cast, it puts an instance of cascading on the stack, where the next card that can be cast from your deck that is 1 mana or less than the spell you are currently casting will end up being cast for free, and specifically it will be cast from Exile. This means that Faldhorn will make a 2/2 green wolf as a result of this. You can see how this kind of deck can be really, really interesting. If you play a high mana Cascade card, you could get anything, or you could get a Rampant Growth and then be sad. Again, I like that kind of variance because I like games that are swingy and tempo-y, where players are constantly vying for who's going to be in first place, and that player is constantly shifting throughout the game. So our core strategy is going to be focused very heavily not just on casting things from Exile, but also benefiting from getting those exiled cards on the board. So we're going to start with this Impact Tremors, Witty Roastmaster, and Molten Gatekeeper, because these will benefit the most from our commander's ability. These wolves that we are trying to get off the top of the deck will now deal 1 damage to each opponent when they touch the board. This should lower the amount of games where we specifically have to turn our wolves sideways at people, though we certainly have a way to turn them sideways and win the game that way as well. We also have 1 Unstable Amulet, which will deal 1 damage to every opponent anytime we cast a card from Exile, meaning regardless of the wolf coming out, this will do its job. Unstable Amulet gives us an option to win without our commander, which is, as always, a very, very important thing to run in a deck like this that has a very, very heavy commander-centered strategy. But I know what you're thinking now. How are we actually going to get all those wolves on the board? And to that end, I need to go ahead and show you our Cascade package, beginning with Throes of Chaos. This card has Cascade and Retrace, so we can cast it from our graveyard as many times as we need to by discarding a spare land from our hand. And because it has Cascade, it will cast the next thing from the top of our deck that costs 1 mana less than the Throes of Chaos. The Throes of Chaos itself does nothing, so this is just going to get a 3 mana or less card from the top of the deck. We also have Annoyed Altasaur, a 6/5 reach and trample dinosaur that has Cascade for 7 mana. Then we have Bloodbraid Elf, one of the new additions from Modern Horizons 3. Well, not this one specifically. I'm actually kind of lying. That one is Bloodbraid Challenger, a slightly stronger Bloodbraid Elf that says Haste, Cascade, just like the original Bloodbraid Elf, but it has the addition of having Escape, where we can exile 3 cards from our graveyard in order to cast this from our graveyard. It also has a higher mana cost, meaning there are more things that it can actually hit from the top of the deck, like our own Bloodbraid Elf, who's a 4 mana haste and cascader. Then we have Geological Appraiser, or Bloodbraid Elf at Home, from the Ixalan set. Comes onto the battlefield, and it discovers 3, allowing us to exile cards from the top of our deck until we hit a non-land card with mana value 3 or less, and then cast it like we would a Cascade card. Unlike Cascade, though, Discover goes on the stack once the creature touches the board. So one of the benefits of Cascade is that you can avoid counter spells with it. Countering a Bloodbraid Elf doesn't do a whole lot because they're just getting rid of the 3/2. Whatever comes off of the deck is still going to be happening. With something like Geological Appraiser, you can just counter it and it's not going to get its ability. Discover is worse than Cascade in some ways, but better in others. For instance, if you do not want to cast the card that you get from Geological Appraiser for whatever reason, you can choose to put it in your hand instead, whereas with Cascade, the card just goes away with the other cards that you were exiling with Cascade. Then we have Noise Marine, a 5 mana 3/2 with Cascade that says when he enters the battlefield, deal damage equal to the number of spells you've cast this turn to any one target. Now, technically, this could also go into the removal and interaction section of the deck, but for the most part, you're just going to cast this and get 1 or 2 spells worth. It might not always kill a card. And then we have Maelstrom Colossus, an 8 mana 7/7 who has Cascade. Now, I would not run this in a Cascade deck if it did not have green, but luckily we do have green, and oftentimes we will accidentally Cascade into our ramp spells, making stuff like this easy to cast. Then we have Aura Phoenix, a flying Cascade for 6 mana that also says whenever we cast a spell with Cascade, we can return this to our hand. Now, one of the benefits to Aura Phoenix that we don't really want to use all that often, but we do have access to, is combining it with our commander's ability to discard a card and exile the top card of our library, and then play that this turn. Now, the reason I say you don't want to use it too often for that ability is, in my experience, because we are running such a high mana deck, oftentimes, when you use Faldhorn's ability, she discards the card, you lose the card sometimes, and then you are stuck with a card off the top of your deck that you won't be able to cast. Oftentimes, it's going to be one of your high mana cards like the Annoyed Altasaur. And now a very valuable piece of your engine, a high mana cascading card, is unable to be cast for a few turns. So while our commander looks like she's able to dig through the deck at a decent click, in reality, I don't find myself using her ability all that often. There are certain cards you can use to try to get her ability up to speed, but I am actually deliberately not including them in this deck because I choose not to use that ability that often to begin with. But if you want to use things that will work with that, we'll get to that later in the upgrade section. But anyway, we've also got Smoldering Stagecoach, which says its power is equal to the number of instants and sorceries in our graveyard, and anytime it attacks, the next instant or sorcery spell that we use has Cascade. Now it says instant and sorcery spell, so we have 7 instants in this deck and 18 sorceries. There will be some games where we get both of those Cascades. Oftentimes, we will only get one, and that's okay. Then we have Into the Time Vortex. It has Cascade and Rebound, so unlike Throes of Chaos, this will activate once, grab the random card from the top of your deck, and then it will cast itself from exile on the next turn that you have priority, and then boom, you will get another free card. Into the Time Vortex is basically 3 free wolves with our commander. Then we have Hit the Motherlode, discover 10, so reveal until we hit a card that costs 10 or less, and then cast it automatically or put it in our hand. Then create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to the difference. And remember, discover, like Cascade, is casting the card from exile, so this is always going to be generating a wolf. Then we have Sweet Gum Recluse. It has Flash, Cascade, does the same off the top deck random thing, and also will put 3/1/1 counters on every creature that entered the battlefield this turn. If you have the ability to generate 2 to 3 wolves before you get the Sweet Gum Recluse out, then you want to be doing that. And there are a few scenarios where you can cast this almost for free that we'll get into when we talk about the land section of the deck. But always try to cast Sweet Gum Recluse at the end of whatever shenanigans you are trying to do, so that you can get the most amount of wolves on the board that will get this +3/+3 ability. It allows them to trade with more cards more often. Then we have Boarding Party, a 6-mana haste and cascader card, along with Bigger on the Inside, a card from the Doctor Who sets, which again, another set of cards that did not exist when I originally played Faldhorn. Like I said, a lot of stuff came out for this deck that made me far more excited to build it in the future. But Bigger on the Inside enchants an artifact or a land and gives it the ability to generate 2 mana, so it's a pseudo ramp, and also gives the next spell we cast Cascade. So you can use this to, say, cast Sweet Gum Recluse and get Cascade off of it. And there's other cards that will do this when we talk about the upgrade section, but this is one of the best things. But we also need to have some exile utility, some ways to do stuff outside of cascading, mainly because we do not have the budget to support all of the Cascade and Discover cards that I would like to play in the deck. So to facilitate that, we have a Chaos Wand, allows us to make an opponent exile cards on the top of their library until they hit an instant or sorcery card. Then we get to cast that card on our own without paying its mana cost. Oftentimes, this is a very good card to aim at, say, the Reanimator player who doesn't have a ton of instants or sorceries in their decks, and the ones that they do have are incredibly powerful. You often don't want to cast this at the Spellslinger player, who's probably just going to give you a Consider or Opt off the top of their deck, or a dud counterspell that you just don't need. Then we have Foretold Soldier, another card from the Doctor Who sets. This card must be blocked if able, can't be blocked by more than one creature, and whenever it deals damage, we exile it face down and foretell it. Foretelling it puts it into exile. We can pay 2 in order to cast it from exile again, and it even has Foretell on it to begin with, so we've got a pseudo control piece we can use, especially against certain Voltron strategies, to knock them down before they get a big enough creature. And if it's not used on them, we can use it on anyone else. It's always going to be trading with a creature. Then we have Itali Primal Storm. Whenever it attacks, exile the top card of everybody's library, and you can cast any number of those cards without paying their mana costs. Itali is a house, and there are commander decks that can be built entirely on his back, and he is worth every single bit of investment into him. In our recursion section, we also have Walk with the Ancestors. This card allows us to discover 4 and then grab a permanent from our graveyard and put it into our hand. 5 mana for recursion is very expensive, but that discover 4 makes up for it. Then we have Savvy Trader, a card that lets us cast spells from exile for 1 mana less, and also exiles a permanent from our graveyard and lets us play that card at any point. Again, cards like this just make it far easier to play our deck. Like I said, sometimes our commander gets locked up on not being able to cast cards from the top, and that's why we have such a heavy Cascade package, but If you add onto that the ability to recur things with the Savvy Trader, then you're going to end up having a far easier time casting your spells. Then, finally, we have one guaranteed win con card in Shared Animosity. The reason I say this is an almost guaranteed win con, if you have Shared Animosity on the board, with the amount of wolves the commander can generate, this can give all the wolves 8 power, 9 power, 10 power. If you've got 10 wolves swinging at multiple people, and they've all got power plus 10, so they're all swinging as 12 twos, there is a very low chance that everybody makes it out of that alive. Shared Animosity almost always kills a player and is a giant target for removal when you are playing your games. That all said, let's go ahead and get into the draw package to see how we're going to be getting all these cards. Now, our draw section is going to be a bit interesting. Now, I am not normally the biggest fan of Impulse Draw, but with Faldhorn, we are going to want to use as much Impulse Draw as we can. Now, again, I do want to shy away from using Faldhorn's Impulse Draw ability, as only getting one card of selection with the Impulse Draw almost always backfires on us. If you can get 2 or 3 cards out of your Impulse Draw, then you're very likely to have a way to trigger your commander, but oftentimes, if you just use the Impulse Draw that our commander has, we get locked into a single card we can't play. Most good Impulse Draw also is either recurable and gives us the ability to play the card over multiple turns. Again, our commander lacks that ability on her own. Her own Impulse Draw doesn't have the ability to cast the card on the following turns, so we are left with whatever mana that we have right now, which is not very good. Now, we do have a single standard draw spell in Harmonize, which allows us to draw 3 cards and costs 4 mana. So any of our cards that have 5 or higher and have Discover or have Cascade will be able to cascade into this and refresh our hand a little bit. But for the most part, all of our other cards are Impulse Draw instead. So let's go over each one and why we are running them. Beginning with Monastery Raid, exile the top 2 cards of your library. If its free running cost was paid, exile the top X cards instead, and you can play those cards until the end of our next turn. Again, if you are playing Impulse Draw and Faldhorn, you really want those cards to be available over multiple turns to give yourself the highest time and the highest amount of chances to cast those cards and play those cards, especially since cards like Monastery Raid could end up hitting 2 lands, which is a dud in most decks, but in our deck means that we'd be able to play each of those lands one after another and generate advantage that way by spawning wolves. Then we have Dream Pillager. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, exile that many cards on the top of our library, and then we can cast those spells from among those cards until the end of our turn. Even though this does not give us Impulse Draw for 2 turns, like most good Impulse Draw does, Dream Pillager does give us the ability to select amongst a lot of cards, which gives us a high amount of chances to trigger our commander. Outpost Siege says at the beginning of our upkeep, exile the top card of our library. Until the end of the turn, we may play that card. Again, this does not give us the ability to play it over multiple turns, but this is, like Dream Pillager, recurable, and unlike Dream Pillager, does only give us the 1, so slightly less powerful, but it is effectively a red Phyrexian Arena. Mishra's Research Desk says we can sacrifice it to exile 2 cards from our library, choose 1, and then we can play that card until the end of the turn. While this card does not give us multi-turn abilities to play things from exile, this does have Unearth, so we can use this twice instead of just once. Light at the Stage, however, does give us the ability to cast the cards over multiple turns and can discount itself if we smack somebody in the face with a wolf. Ignite the Future exiles the top 3 cards and then lets us play those cards over the next 2 turns, while also having Flashback where it can be used again and then gives us the ability to cast all those cards for free if we use the Flashback cost of the Ignite the Future. Then we have Escape the Wilds, exile the top 5 from our library, play cards from them exiled until the next turn, like everything else that is good about Impulse Draw, but it also lets us play an additional land this turn, meaning that if we exile 3 lands from the top of our library with Escape from the Wilds, we will have the ability to play all of them, assuming that you did not, jump the gun and play your land for turn before playing Escape to the Wilds. Just be good about that and you'll benefit from cards like this. Stolen Strategy allows us to get a mini Atali effect. At the beginning of our upkeep, exile the top card of every opponent's library, and then cast spells from among the exiled cards. Like Outpost Siege, this is very, very recurable, as it will happen every single upkeep. And also, this gives us access to other people's spells outside of our own. This serves two purposes for us. One, having access to more cards is good. Two, having access to cards that are not our own, bits of our strategy that we are not having to eat away when we whiff on them, is also incredibly helpful and important. Embrace the Unknown lets us exile the top 2 cards of our library until end of turn, and then we can play those cards. End of our next turn, sorry. But it also has Retrace, allowing us to cast the card again by discarding a land. Then we have Invasion of Kaldheim, which lets us exile all cards from our hand and then draw that many cards, and until the end of our next turn, we can play the cards that have been exiled. Again, this is Impulse Draw that lets us get multiple cards, so high selection. It lets us use it after multiple turns, and if we hit the Invasion of Kaldheim after we've given it to a player as it is a battle, it'll flip into the Pyre of the World tree, which lets us discard cards to deal 2 damage to any target, and if we discard a land card, we can then exile the top card of our library to play that card this turn. This is a slightly better version of our commander's ability, as it does attach damage and removal onto our cards. Then we have Party Thrasher, lets all of our non-creature spells we cast from exile have Convoke, so it can be very easy to get them on the board. Even things like Hit the Mother Load now can cost very, very little. And at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, we can discard a card, and if we do, exile 2 cards from our library, and we can play them. We can choose one of them and play that card this turn. Again, it is very, very important to remember that cards like Party Thrasher, while they do not give us the ability to play cards over multiple turns, it does give us card selection and is very recurable. As long as you have a couple of those pieces, then you have a good impulse draw card. But cards that only let you impulse draw for the turn you play the card and are not recurable generally are not good for us to use. And that does it for our draw section, but how are we going to keep people from winning the game? Well, so like with the draw section of the video, we want to make sure that a good majority of the cards that are in our removal section also synergize very well with what our deck is doing. So to begin, let's go ahead and look at the first of 14 single target removal spells with Case of the Burning Masks. This 3-mana card can deal 3 damage to a creature, but also, if 3 or more sources we have dealt damage this turn by any way, shape, or form, we can then sacrifice this to exile the top 3 cards of our library, choose one of them, and play the card this turn. Basically, free impulse draw, and then suddenly we are off to the races. Demon Bolt can deal 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker and has Foretell, so we can cast itself from exile. Natural Reclamation blows up an artifact or enchantment, but has Cascade, so it will automatically get free stuff from the top of our deck. Decimate can blow up an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land, land. It has to hit all. It has to hit all. So this means that you will have to use Decimate and be the bad guy and blow up somebody's land. So just make sure you're aiming at like a Nykthos or a 3-tree city or anything that is obscenely powerful. You Find Some Prisoners can also blow up an artifact or exile the top 3 cards of an opponent's library and let us choose one in order to cast it. A Braid can blow up a creature or an artifact. Zoewa's Justice can basically Chaos Warp any artifact or creature with mana value 1 or greater, throw into the library, and then they discover X, where X is the card's mana value. So use this to get rid of somebody's Soul Ring sometimes, or use this on our own board to get a free card. Then we have Return to Nature, destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or exile any card from any graveyard. Very, very powerful card. I try to include in almost every green deck. The Flux lets us deal 4 damage to a creature an opponent controls, and then it will exile cards on the top of our library on turns 2, 3, 4, and 5 after it came out, before finally giving us access to 6 red mana for a Haymaker turn. I have never played a game where this card actually gets to its final ability, and I don't think I ever want to play a game where it gets to its final ability. I just want to cast this card, get rid of a problem, and then get free impulse draw for several turns. And then we have Fires of Mount Doom. Enters the battlefield, deals 2 damage to a creature an opponent controls, destroys all equipment attached to that creature, giving you a fun angle for Voltron commanders, and we can exile the top card of our library for 3 mana and play that card this turn. So it's removal with Impulse Draw attached to it. Anytime we play that card, we deal 2 damage to each player, giving us access to even more burn to get closer to the end zone. Then we have Stump Stomp, which allows us to deal damage equal to a creature's power to a creature an opponent controls, and Bridgeworks Battle, which gives a creature 2/2 until end of turn, and then also allows it to fight a creature. Both of these removal spells also double as lands, so they are very, very good for trying to fill out a deck by giving it basically free access to removal. NDFCs allow you to turn land slots into removal slots, draw slots, or whatever utility slot you happen to need. So use them where you can. Then we have Chaos Warp. Shuffle a permanent into an owner's library, and then they get a new permanent from the top of their deck. This card is both one of the most powerful removal spells in Magic the Gathering and also one of the biggest ways to cuck yourself. As an example, I played this deck recently at my LGS, and I used Chaos Warp to get rid of somebody's Mana Crypt because, well, let's be honest, it was a spite play. They deserved losing their Mana Crypt for the audacity to play Mana Crypt in a casual game. After getting rid of their Mana Crypt, I ended up flipping Thrakkus the Busher off the top of their deck. Thrakkus gives all dragons double power, and the deck was a Miriam deck. So there were 2 Thrakkuses on the board. So there was quadra power on the board. I proceeded to take a 24/24 Miriam to the face, died to commander damage, and accepted that my loss was entirely my fault, since my board was like 30 creatures deep, and I had every ability to win the game on the following turn. He both needed to remove me from the game, and it was entirely my fault, and I accept that. So, just understand, sometimes Chaos Warp leads to fewer victories and more fun. That's fine, though, I think. Warstorm Surge allows us to deal damage to any target whenever a creature enters the battlefield. This means that we can use this for removal. Anytime a wolf comes out, stack its damage onto something until it dies, or we can use this to slowly burn players out of the game. Your pick. Pick whatever works best for you. Is player removal what you need right now, or is creature removal what you need right now? And then for board wipes, we have 2. Volcanic Torrent, which has Cascade, and then deals X damage to every creature in Planeswalker our opponents control, where X is the number of spells we've cast this turn, and Impending Flux, which will deal X damage +1 for every card we've cast from anywhere other than our hand this turn. It also has Foretell, giving us the ability to automatically have 1 spell, so we will always have at least 2 damage with this spell. But if you cast it from Cascade, then it's going to be 3 damage, plus whatever else you've got from Cascade during that turn. That all said, let's go ahead and see how we're going to afford all of our cardboard. And now we get to the mana of this deck. Now, granted, we are a Gruul deck, so mana comes pretty easily as we've got access to green, but like always, we do want a good bit of our mana production to also help the central theme of the deck. So, to facilitate that, we've got a 13-card ramp engine beginning with Rift Sower. This one is a basic mana dork, but it has Suspend, so we can trigger our commander with it if we need to. Terramorph also has Rebound. It gets a basic land from our library onto the battlefield, and that Rebound will allow us to get an instance of our commander's ability as well. Dawn Shredder Elk and Wayfarer's Bauble make their usual returns along with Font of Fertility. They are all the same card for basically every purpose that matters. Heaped Harvest is a new addition from Bloomburrow. 3 mana, drop it on the board, get a basic land card onto the battlefield tapped, pay 2 mana at a later turn, and get another basic land out of it. And then we have Farhaven Elf and Wood Elves to grab basic lands out of the deck. Wood Elves can also grab dual lands, though, which makes it a little bit better. Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl are 1 mana accelerants that we have access to. Utopia Sprawl being a lot less expensive these days, thank God. But I want to note that one of the main reasons that these end up being good is in upgraded versions of the deck that have things like Wild Magic Sorcerer and other ways to give 2 mana cards Cascade or Discover, you need to have some targets that you'll be able to hit. So Utopia Sprawl and Wild Growth fit that bill perfectly fine. Venture Forth is one of the slower mana producers in the deck, but it does have Suspend, so you can drop it on an early turn and get its ability later, where it'll cast from Exile, giving you a wolf, and the land it gives you is also from Exile, giving you another wolf. Then Search for Tomorrow, again, a Suspend card, gives us a basic land onto the battlefield untapped. We can use it on turn 1. Also, we can just throw it into the Suspend area if we don't need the mana right now to get a wolf trigger on later turns. And as for the lands, we've got 7 mountains and 9 forests, with some dual lands being Mossfire Valley, Sheltered Thicket, Game Trail, Command Tower, Cinderglade, and Gruul Turf. Gruul Turf, as it is a repeatable land, we can use this to reuse utility lands, and cards like Shelter Thicket and Cinderglade are searchable lands, so they can be used with things like Wood Elves very easily. Our fetching lands also include Blighted Woodland, Shire Terrace, Myriad Landscape, Ash Barrens, Evolving Wild, Promising Vein, and Terramorphic Expanse, so we have access to mana selection. And our utility lands will be a Kessig Wolf run to give us a Voltron win condition if we desperately need one, on top of a Mosswort Bridge and Spinerock Knoll, which can cast cards from Exile that are hideawayed on them. Mosswort Bridge, just by having creatures with power 10 or greater total, which means you've got a lot of wolves on the board, and Spinerock Knoll by dealing 7 damage to an opponent, which is easy to do again with the wolves. Then we have the Hidden Nursery and Hidden Volcano cards, which can just discover if you sacrifice them, so they're just really good utility lands. Hate that they come into play tapped, but that is the sacrifice we make for having the extra utility here. That said, the mana in this deck is very smooth, as we are playing just a 2-color green deck. Most of these decks can get away with far more basic lands than other decks in the first place, since they have access to some of the best mana production in Magic the Gathering. But I guess this is where we go into the next part that we always have to get into. What happens if you've got a little extra money and you want to upgrade the deck a bit further? If you are upgrading this deck, there's a couple things I want to go ahead and say. There is an angle you can take that involves a little more Exile utility than what I am using in this current version of the build. And that angle includes using Containment Construct and Conspiracy Theorist to transform discarded cards into exiled cards for the commander. Now, I personally do not run these even in my full power version of the deck, and the main reason for that is very simple. I don't really use the discard ability on the commander. If you disagree with that and would rather use the discard ability of the commander, then I can completely understand that. If that is the case, then by all means run those cards. But as I don't run the discard ability that often, I don't find any utility in those cards specifically. As for the cards I would definitely run, let's go ahead and begin with Shamanic Revelation. We generate enough creatures to make this draw power very useful, and in the situations where we have access to extra power on all of the wolves, cards like Shamanic Revelation pull double duty in giving us a little bit of healing so that we can make up for, say, more aggro players at the table. Beast Within gives us better access to removal. Brass's Tunnel Grinder is one of the most important cards I would choose to upgrade the deck with. First of all, being able to get a free wheel off of this is fantastic, but the backside that you can flip to after you've descended a few times is one of the best lands the deck has. Anytime you cast a permanent spell, of which this version of the deck is running 8 artifacts, 12 enchantments, and 22 creatures, so well over 40 different permanent spells, the card will discover X, where X is the spell's mana value. So if you cast a 3-mana Farhaven Elf, you will then discover 3 with this. The free utility you get from this is fantastic, and the fact that it's a draw card on its own at a reasonable price for a wheel is just kind of insane, and shows how much power creep has really affected Magic the Gathering, let's be honest. Violent Outburst is also one that I would run. Not only is giving all the wolves 1/0 a very non-negligible thing after you've got enough wolves on the board, but the spell itself has Cascade already, so you're already going to be getting extra utility out of this with the deck. Call Forth the Tempest has Cascade, and deals damage to every creature your opponent controls equal to the total mana of all the spells you've cast this turn. So, Call Forth the Tempest is already going to be dealing 8 damage to all of your opponent's creatures, but that Cascade is going to turn this into a very strong board wipe. 8 mana for a board wipe seems like a bit much, but in our deck it effectively reads: play 2 spells for free, and also get 2 wolves on the board, and also trigger all of the abilities that our wolves coming on the board will do. I'm gonna be honest, Call Forth the Tempest is a house in this deck. I'm excited every time I see this in my hand, especially because it lets me trigger things like Passionate Archaeologist from the full power build. If we have this on the board and we have our commander, then whenever we cast a spell from Exile, this creature will deal damage equal to the spell's mana value to any opponent. So we cast Call Forth the Tempest from Exile with any card, we're dealing 8 damage to somebody's face on top of the 2 spells being cast from Exile. But that means you've got to be impulse drawing things like Call Forth the Tempest. Basically, with Passionate Archaeologist, the game ends very, very quickly. Then we have Itali Primal Conqueror. It has a backside that we are never going to use because we are just not built that way. We are better than that. It totally drops on the board and makes everybody reveal cards until they hit a castable card, and then we cast each of those cards from exile. So with our commander, this is always going to be 4 triggers of our commander's ability, and then it leaves us with a 7/7 trampler that people can get some psychological warfare effects from. They will believe wholeheartedly that we will flip it and harm them. Remind them that we are better than them. We will not be flipping them and harming them with this. We're going to kill them with our own cards in our own ways. Dragonhawk Fate's Tempest is one of those ways, though. When this enters the battlefield or attacks, exile the top X cards of our library, where X is the number of creatures we have with power 4 or greater, and then we can play those cards until the end step. As long as Dragonhawk's on the board, this is always going to be 1, and if we don't cast the cards, then we get to deal 2 damage to each opponent. This can end the game on its own in several situations, and in my experience, while this card does better in, say, Miriam, where if you've cloned Miriam once or twice, Dragonhawk is just an instant game win, in this deck, it is the repeatable, constant access to impulse draw that we do like to see, with a payoff for not using the cards. Wild Magic Sorcerer is also one of the most important includes you can find in your upgrade path. The first spell you cast from exile each turn gets Cascade. That means if you Cascade into something, it automatically has Cascade. And if you play something from an impulse draw, then it automatically has Cascade. Wild Magic Sorcerer is a just amazing card. Then we have Apex Devastator, which has, let me go ahead and read here. Cascade, 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 Cascade. Yeah, almost any time that you cast this thing, the game is probably very close to being over. The amount of advantage you personally gain from summoning 8 damage worth of wolves, getting 4 wolves worth of triggers, and getting a 10/10 on the board and 4 free spells is absolutely fantastic. And the card got a reprint recently, so it's now more affordable than ever. Agate Instigator is also another card to add into the deck, as it is another Impact Tremors ability that you have access to that has Offspring, and I believe you can even cast Offspring abilities while the card is on the Cascade stack, so you have access to this at all times as long as it is a spell. Plargan Nasari is also a very oppressive card that I would 100% advocate for using. At the beginning of your upkeep, every player exiles cards on the top of their library until they hit a non-land card. An opponent chooses a non-land card this way, and you may cast up to 2 spells from among the other cards exiled this way. So pick an opponent that is either on your side or you are being very nefarious with, and you get a version of Stolen Strategy that always has hits and has even more fun political games to be played. Finally, for the mana, I don't normally like suggesting things to add to the mana pool because I'm going to be honest, mana is where most of the money goes in any of these decks because people seem to be addicted to things like Stomping Grounds and Fetch Lands and don't actually understand that the amount of oomph you get into your deck by upgrading your mana base with money cards is not as high as the oomph you get by putting decent, actual, usable cardboard in your deck. A smooth mana base is good, but Wizards has kind of spoiled us in terms of how to make a smooth mana base at any price point. But if you really wanted to go wild, I guess 3 Tree City from Bloomborough would do you no harm. The card will give you whatever color mana you need for all of the wolves you have on the board with the commander, which is a good payoff for having all those wolves out and baits out removal far faster. What I mean by that is if you have 3 Tree City on the board and you have a non-lethal amount of wolves, players will be incentivized to board white faster, which allows you to rebuild sooner, because they do not want you having access to all of the mana from 3 Tree City. You may not use it specifically for the mana gain in most of your games, but you will use it as a political tool to garner favor and force situations where people have to use their spells way, way earlier than they originally intended. That all said, that's the upgrades that I would put. There's more obviously that you can do, but as with any of these upgrade paths, just pick and choose what speaks to you and remove what doesn't speak to you from the 99 of the deck. But I guess we need to get to some conclusions, huh? In conclusion, I'm gonna be honest, if you haven't played a deck like this, it is a blast, but you do need to have a little bit of negotiating power when you bring a deck like this to the table. You see, the problem with commanders like Faldhorn, as you will find when you play her, the games you have where she goes off, she will go off so hard that nobody will feel like she is fair ever again. And then the games where she doesn't go off, where you cascade into the wrong cards or hit nothing but duds, are the games where people will wonder why you ever even built the deck. So it's a very good idea to be honest when you sit down at a table with this and let everybody know, hey, this deck is effectively a gambling deck. It can consistently get very strong board states, but to get the strongest of board states is going to be the biggest of gambles ever. If I get that, then you need to handle me. If I don't get that, then you probably still need to deal with me before I get one of those board states. Because most of the threats in the deck are always in the deck, waiting to be flipped off the top with Cascade and Discover and Itali triggers, it is a good idea to be 100% honest with your table and let them know, yeah, I am playing a commander who's gonna be kinda powerful. You do need to deal with me. Even if I don't have a board state, that doesn't mean that I'm not a threat. We need to move past, like, collectively, as a group of players, we need to move past two things. We need to move past metagaming, where you constantly target the person who won the last game because that somehow has any effect on the next game. We also need to move past the, I'm not a threat yet because my board state isn't developed. Meanwhile, you have everything in your hand to do a 1 or 2 turn combo. You just don't have the mana to drop them on the board yet. Like, we need to move past those negotiations. Maybe just be super honest in your games when you sit down with a deck like this and say, hey, I am playing with power right now. However, asterisk, that power might not always come out. If we're able to do that, then we're gonna have better games of Commander. That said, let me know what y'all think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and as always, everybody, insert into video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Briskreek, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Raveler, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Mark Anthony, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.